All right, so the province is starting to crack down on short-term rentals. For those of you who don't know what a short-term rental is, it's essentially an Airbnb or a Vrbo. The province defines it as a unit rented out for 28 days or less. A lot of people seen this coming for the past few years, but I don't think anyone really expected it to happen this year. If you remember, it was only a few months ago that the province came out with a rental registry where they were going to require all landlords to register their rental properties so that the province could get a better idea of how many rental units there are currently and what portion of those are short-term rentals. That was set to come into effect April of 2023, and it still is. However, they've already gone forward with cracking down on short-term rentals, even before they were able to get any data. So here's what you need to know. Effective September 1st of 2023, short-term rentals will be disallowed in residential neighborhoods where the rented unit is not formally a part of the owner's property. And what I mean by that is if you have a rental unit in your backyard, or if you rent out your basement or a bedroom in your home, those are still allowed. But gone are the days of being able to buy a detached home in a residential area and operate it solely as an Airbnb. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm normally against regulation in the real estate industry, and I'm usually against government intervention when it comes to private property. So I'll tell you what my initial reaction was to this news and why my opinion kind of changed the further I looked into it. My first thought that this was probably actually a good thing, which would come as a surprise to most people that have been watching my videos. We all know that there's a housing shortage in Nova Scotia, but especially in HRM. And at face value, I've seen it as a good thing to prohibit people from buying properties that were built with the intentions of families purchasing them and living there. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized this is probably gonna have some serious negative effects to our city and also to our province. Tourism makes up a fairly large percentage of the province's income. And 20% of the money that the tourism brings into Nova Scotia comes from short-term rentals. There are over 3,700 houses on Airbnb and Vrbo that have been listed as the entire house, meaning that they would be subject to this new rule change. That would effectively be cut out of the tourism industry. If you were to run the numbers using the average vacancy and the average rental rate per night for those 3,700 homes, you'll find out that you're gonna be losing just under $50 million per year. We don't currently have the hotel units to make up that demand, so that's effectively $50 million gone out of the provincial budget every year until we can build more hotels. Now, I know what a lot of people will say. They'll say, great, that's 3,700 more homes that will either be available for sale for somebody to buy and live in, or be available to rent. And the thought with that is that if there are more houses available for sale, the price will come down and make things more affordable. And if there are more rentals available, the average rental rate will come down and make rent more affordable. However, I don't think either of those things are gonna happen. In Halifax alone, there are over 1,600 houses available for short-term rent. Even if half of those ended up making it to the market and sold, that would not even be enough to bring us to the listing inventory that we had 3 years ago, when price was still climbing. And if all those units were to somehow become long-term rentals, well, my fear with that is that the landlords that were getting $3,600 to $4,000 a month operating as a short-term rental, they're not all of a sudden gonna be happy with $1,600 a month. They're going to try and rent those properties for as much money as possible, and it may have the adverse effect of actually making the average rent go up, even though there's more inventory. Halifax currently sits at a 1% vacancy rate in all residential apartments and rental units. I doubt that after September, when these regulations come into effect, we will see that change at all. There were 2 comments that were mentioned in the media that I think you should be aware of regardless of what side of the aisle that you sit on. One was a comment from Wayne Mason, the councillor for Halifax South, saying that he would hope that these changes would cut down on the so-called ghost hotels, where people buy up apartment buildings, evict tenants, and operate them solely as short-term rentals. Well, I wanted to say that if Mr. Mason knew anything about the Residential Tenancy Act, he would know that that can't happen and it doesn't happen. You cannot evict a tenant in order to turn a property into a different use. The only way a landlord would be able to do that is if the property was in such disrepair that they had to evict the tenant in order to be able to do the repairs, and even still they would have to compensate that tenant with 3 months rent. It's also important to mention that Tourism Nova Scotia suggested against implementing this until at least the rental registry was in effect and we had more data to determine whether this was necessary or going to have the desired effects. So I'm interested to know, what do you think? This is one that I'm actually kind of torn on. I don't know which end of the aisle I sit on. I understand that there's a need to reserve houses and free up houses from the investment sector for residential use. I'm also against government intervention and the government telling people what they can and cannot do with private property. And I'm fearful that the effects of these regulations will have an overall negative effect on our economy here in Halifax. But that's just me. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section below. And as always, I hope you found this video informative, and I will see you on the next one.